Okay, so it sounds like we're coming through. Let me set a couple expectations. My name is Perry Carpenter. This is Jessica Barker, as you can tell by the program. We are going to talk about something that we are super passionate about to a bunch of people who are also super passionate about this topic. That brings a certain level of anxiety and responsibility to it. The other thing is I have the distinct pleasure of sharing this stage today with one of my idols in this area.
That's
so that
what I
also
have.
brings a little bit of anxiety. But as we get going, let me also set one other stage. We're going to kind of open up together a little bit, but then there's going to be 2 or 3 distinct parts of this. I'll take about 12 minutes and go through way too many slides for that 12-minute area. And then Jess is going to take about 12, 13 minutes and go through a much more reasonable number of slides for that amount of time. And then we are intentionally trying to leave time for questions at the end. That can be anything about this presentation or really anything about awareness, behavior, culture, our personal lives, anything else is fine. So to set the stage, I just want to forecast kind of where this is going. And when we think about the past several years in security awareness, the past several years in phishing, we've seen a lot of mistakes happen. We've seen a lot of times where people have kind of stepped outside of really realizing that there are faces, there are emotions, there are life circumstances to the receiving end of the fish that they send out or the communication that they send out. And the problem with that is that we don't often realize how bad of a situation we've created until we've done it, unless we reframe the conversation a little bit. And so that's what I'm hoping to bring to the table a little bit. And this will also talk a little bit of a prognostication about this industry that we find ourselves in. Jess, what do you want to get out of this?
So what I want to talk about, kind of leading on from Perry's discussion, is to touch on perceptions, which I think is one of the most important aspects of security culture, but also one of the most overlooked. So I'm going to be speaking about perceptions of us working on the human side within the industry of security, people's perceptions of themselves in relation to security, perceptions of leadership, and also how we can help shape perceptions to be more positive and more security conscious.
Awesome. So just a little bit about us, if you're not familiar with either of us, go ahead, Jess.
Thanks, Perry. So I've been working in security awareness, behavior, and culture for 12 or 13 years now. When I started out, if you had told me that my work would mean I could emigrate to the USA from the UK, in case you couldn't tell, that I would be working on my 4th book, and that I would be receiving a medal from the King of the UK, I would not have believed you. It would have blown my mind, but somehow here we are, and I'm delighted to be speaking with you all today and sharing the stage with someone I truly admire.
Thank you. And I have written a couple books in this space. I've kind of lived in the awareness, behavior, culture space for between 15 and 20 years, depending on how you count it. I've been a recipient of a lot of training. I've also run some large-scale training programs at Global 1000 companies. I've been a Gartner analyst covering the security awareness space and really working with all the vendors and the CISOs around the world, trying to figure out how to be effective at this. And then now I work for a security awareness vendor, trying to shape the future of where this goes. In this, I've also written a couple books about the discipline of security awareness. I executive produced a show called The Inside Man and run a couple podcasts that look at the intersection of humanity and technology through different lenses. And so that's really the mindset that I bring is, where does the human sit within the equation of anything, in any societal move, in any technology-based move? Where does the human sit? And so with that, when we talk about, and Lance gave a great forecast with this already, the terms that we use, how we describe ourselves, how we describe our industry, we're kind of at this crossroads, right? You're hearing phrases like human risk management. You're hearing phrases like awareness, behavior, culture. You're hearing phrases like, or words like influence. And it all means that we have to take a step back and apply this critical question: is what is our intended purpose? If we think about first principles type of approach to this, We have to ask, why do we exist in the first place? What is our measure of success? How do we know when we've gotten there? Or are we just pushing information to people, putting butts in seats, eyeballs on screens, all of those kind of things? And so as we've really thought through this over the past few years, a lot of us have been raising our hand and saying, you know what we do isn't really awareness, because just because somebody's aware doesn't mean that they care. There's a human component in this. We have to really think about the individual. We have to think about our goals. But our discipline has this branding problem, right? What happens when somebody looks at the Verizon DBIR and they go, oh my God, 74% of all data breaches come back to some kind of human-related issue? Well, we've, as a discipline, in all of security and through the vendor market, of which I participate in, we've kind of conditioned people, the happy CISO, to type in security awareness, which then sets a false frame that awareness is about information. But vendors, and I've consulted with a lot of these, I even think about this in my own company. If you are to rebrand yourself away from security awareness, then your page 3, page 5 Google result, you were never found and you go out of business. So you have to always start the conversation with awareness that reinforces the frame, but then move somebody off of that and say, it's not really about awareness, it's about something else. And so we're at this flux point where even we've changed the name of this conference to try to set what the next 10 years is like, but it's uncomfortable, right? Because we have this definitional problem where we talk about awareness and behavior and culture and human risk management and human layer defense and whatever other words we want to attach with this thing, whatever it is that we all do. And each of these has implications and each has some baggage with it. And so we have to understand the frames that we create so that we don't accidentally create another problem. Right? Because somebody's going to say, when you talk about behavior, what do you mean? When you talk about managing human risk, what do you mean by that? When you talk about a human layer, what do you mean by that? And there's good and not so productive discussions that come across with any word that we choose. But as we think about this, ultimately, when I take that step back and say, what are we here for in the first place? It's these 3 things. And every good program is going to have these tenets with it. We are there to win hearts and minds. So that means that we're bringing the humans in. We're really trying to build a relationship with them. We're there to influence behaviors. That's the behavioral outcome. That's the action step in this. And then the ultimate goal, the why we exist in the first place, is reduction of risk in the organization. So you can get to something like human risk management with that, but you can also attach a lot of other words as well. But as long as we're doing these 3 things, I'm actually a happy person. I believe that we're serving the industry and we're doing good things. We are meeting the mandate that we have. So we also have to realize that, again, if there's issues that come up with words, we have to think about what conversations they cause. If the human goes, wait, you see me as a risk, well, then we're kind of back to, is the human the weakest link type of thing. And what we need to then start to move the conversation to is, no, everybody exists within an ecosystem. There are risks that come at you. We're there to help protect you and build resilience around that. There are also just risks that happen anytime something exists in the world. And we're there to help manage that and build a protective barrier so that you don't accidentally cause harm in any way. So we have to really think about these so we don't create the conversations from the past that have not been productive. So we also have to think about these phrases that we throw out, like, well, you're the first line of defense and the best line of defense, you're the last line of defense, you're the weakest link. All of these, again, cause other big problems, right? Because each has an implication. For me, I don't use any of those anymore, even though I have in the past. And I just say, humans are a critical line of defense, because if a human is the first line of defense, maybe then they're in the wrong place. If the human is the reason that an organization has a breach, then I'm sorry, that's a technology failure. At the end of the day, if a human is your last line of defense, you've not properly segmented the network, you've not properly put in other controls, you've not really thought about all these other things that can and should be done. And so the humans should not be in the position of being the last line of defense, but they are a critical layer. And if you neglect them, you're missing out on some resilience. So with this then, let me kind of get to the one thing that I want you to think about. If we're doing this well, what does a program look like? We already talked about win hearts and minds, influence behaviors, reduce risk. Well, we do that through some things that look pretty traditional. Outreach, this is me talking to other people, getting messages out. This is newsletters. This is all the kind of stuff that you typically associate with security, quote unquote, awareness. Newsletters, videos, all, signs, all of that kind of stuff. And then you have training and simulations. The key thing here is that there is a participatory piece of action that happens. If it's a phishing simulation, somebody can interact with that. If it's a tabletop simulation, somebody can interact with that. If it's the latest VR, AR, cool whiz-bang thing that you do, somebody has the ability to participate in that and affect an outcome. If it's an escape room, somebody has the ability to participate. So outreach, training and simulations, and then the last thing is where the industry is going more and more. That's all the cool AI, ML, building in tons of other APIs so you understand what else is going on in the environment and delivering just the right bit of training or behavioral conditioning at the right time for the right person at the right location, all of these cascading areas of rightness. So what then does that look like? Well, I think each of these express themselves in three other things. And content, so we don't get rid of content. Outreach has content, right? You send out a newsletter, you put out a poster. Training and simulations, if it's a phishing simulation, your template is a piece of content. If you do a tabletop exercise, the instructions and the engagement pieces are the content. If you do human detection response, the injection that you put and saying, hey, we noticed that you were trying to do that. That is a piece of content. So you have to think about that. And you have to think about how that creates or messes up an experience for someone. What are they feeling on the other end of that? What is their experience? How are they engaged, or how are you missing the possibility of engaging them? And then the last thing is, and this is foundational, it's why I put it at the bottom of the pyramid, relationships, because everything you do in this program, from the content that you choose to the emotions that somebody feels, will build, maintain, or destroy a relationship. So if your goal with this is win hearts and minds, influence behaviors, reduce risk, if part of that is getting people to report, to get people to engage, to become security champions, all that, and you're tearing down the relationship because you're sending really poorly thought out phishing simulations or other bits of engagement, well, then you're kind of losing that battle. So for me, relationship is the primary thing that I want to focus on, and then build everything out from that, because that emotional impact is super, super, super important. We also have to think about the way that we view everybody around us. So, we tend to think about, and security people tend to kind of classify to us versus them, right? We have the us that is the security team, and then we have the them, the cyber criminals, and what we need to get away from is the them, which is the other people on the side of the screen, viewing them as this opposing force or this thing that we have to manage. That's not really the way to think about it. And we see this reinforced over and over and over by the imagery that people put out there, by the memes that they create. This does not win hearts and minds. This creates enemies. This gets people frustrated and say, they don't see me as me, they see me as a problem. Well, I'll show them. I won't take their training. I'll click on things just for fun to see what happens. So we have to realize that our content is the face and the voice of our CISO and team, and we have to tailor things to that human, really, response cycle that is there and the emotion that we want to create. And if we're not tailoring our messages to create the emotion that we want, then we're just taking a chance on the way that somebody is going to receive that. The other thing is we have to think about our engagement. It's great to have programs that reward people externally, like gift cards and all that, but the effectiveness of that degrades over time dramatically. We need to build intrinsic motivation, and that takes a long amount of time. We have to think about, if we're going to give something away, should it be a $20 Starbucks gift card, or should it be something that reflects the brand of the security team so that they get buy-in in that? Because what we've seen over and over and over, and here's a meta study that shows 128 different experiments, show the conclusion that tangible rewards like gift cards and things like that that do not associate somebody with an identity or that do not really meet a need that somebody has in a real way have a negative impact on intrinsic motivation. If we're out to build relationships, win hearts and minds, we have to be aware of that. We have to think about the social signaling that we can create. There's a ton of great science in this, and I would encourage you to look at a book called Mixed Signals by Uri Gnesi, behavioral economist, does a fantastic job breaking this out because it all comes down to relationships. And with that, I'll hand it off to Jess.
Thank you, Perry. So to follow on from what Perry's been speaking about emotions, about how we make people feel, about how we engage with people, how we see them, it's also thinking about how do people see us and how can we positively influence that? So one question I have that I would love everybody to think about, I would love to speak about over the course of the next couple of days, is how we can elevate the perceptions of those of us working and the human side in the eyes of others. And that can be others in the security industry and beyond. How do we communicate to people the value that we bring? Because I see this paradox where, as Perry rightly highlighted, you see research like the Verizon data breach investigation report highlighting the importance and the impact of people when it comes to cybersecurity. And yet at the same time, and I know other people feel this too, based on conversations that I have, there can be this sense that the human side, that awareness, behavior, and culture is added on. We don't get the budget, we don't get the buy-in. And that has increased, that has improved in the last few years from my perception, but I feel like we still can be elevated in the industry. So I think it's something to think about of what can we do to positively influence that, to have a higher seat at the table. Now, moving on to perceptions and perceptions of security. One thing I wanted to touch on was about how the human brain is different to a computer. Of course, we're all thinking a lot lately about how we can make computers more like the human brain. And we've got some great talks looking at the agenda on AI coming up. We had a great keynote touching on that this morning. But of course, we can also look at that the other way round and think of the ways in which a brain is different to a computer. We don't have perfect memory, perfect recall, and we interpret data. Something we're looking to try and teach machines to do better is something that actually we need to be aware of when it comes to awareness, that we take in data and we interpret it in a volatile way. We perceive things differently depending on where we're coming from and the subcultures we exist within. So to illustrate this, I am going to try an experiment, and I'm going to play an audio clip. You're about to hear my voice saying some words transformed by a computer to sound like gibberish. And I'd like you to listen carefully, and then I'm going to ask you some questions based on it. Okay, so who heard the noise? Who heard the gibberish? Hands up, hands up. Hopefully everyone, most people, keep your hands up, keep your hands up. Only put your hands down if you could make sense of what was being said. So keep your hand up if you couldn't make sense of the words. And I know at least 1, 2 people, 3 in the room could. Okay, everyone with your hands up, who could make no sense or very little sense of any word? Fantastic. Okay. I am going to leave that there. I'm going to ask you to put your hands down. Thank you so much. Keep that in mind. And if you think you could make out a word or more, please write it down. I'm going to come back to it in a few minutes when your perceptions should have shifted to such a way that it makes sense to you. It'll still sound like a computer, but you should be able to understand the message. So we're going to play that game as we move on. But before we get to that, I am going to touch a little bit more on what perceptions mean in terms of cybersecurity culture, because I think we often talk about awareness. We often talk about behaviors. We're increasingly talking about values, how we can tie the values of the security cultures we're developing with the values of the organization. But something I think we don't talk about as much is perceptions, and they're hugely impactful. I actually just shared my video of the week. I share a video a week on YouTube, often put it on LinkedIn as well. And this week it's all about perceptions. So I'm talking about slightly different things today, but it seems to be my theme of the day. So perceptions are influential in a few different ways, a few different layers. And one of the most influential, of course, is whether there is a perception in the organization that senior leadership endorses security, promotes security, values security. And I wanted to share some statistics with you from Club CISO. I'm on the advisory board of Club CISO, a membership of about 600 security leaders around the world. And the data this year, we asked what's been most effective at fostering a security culture over the last 12 months. And I find the feedback fascinating because the overwhelming majority answer was leadership endorsement. This perception that there is that active, not just tone from the top, but that championing from the top of security. And that is seen as way more influential than whether there's even a reported culture of no blame. That perception that there is psychological safety if something goes wrong, hugely important. But what we're hearing from CISOs is actually having leadership endorse is more important. And then we can look at other things, security champions, training, targeted training, giveaways, swag. These things that sometimes we can focus on in a security program, actually bringing less value to the development of a security culture than the perception of leadership being involved. And another perception I want to draw your attention to is the statistic that the majority of these security leaders, 62% this year, feel that their security culture is an ongoing priority and is making progress. Now, if we compare this with the other graph that I was just running through, it seems that only 21% are measuring their security culture. So where is that perception coming from that the security culture is getting better? I don't have the answer for that. Maybe it's from some data, maybe it's from a gut feel, but it doesn't seem to be coming from rigorous measurement of the culture. Just leaving that one out there. Now, one of the most important perceptions in security culture and in security behavior is arguably how people perceive themselves, self-efficacy. So going back to seminal work of Bandura around self-efficacy, a person's perception that they are able to practice the behavior that is required for a specific outcome. And the research suggests that this is far more important than, say, raising the threat, than scaring people. In fact, fear can actually undermine a person's sense of self-efficacy, meaning that they perform more poorly. And I gave my 2022 RSA keynote on the psychology of fear and talked about that in much more detail. But I wanted us all to think about what do we do to raise the perception of the people we work with where they feel that they are able to engage in what we are recommending. And some of this is about our communications, but it's also providing the right tools and the guidance and the support to use those tools. Because we can help people understand why they need good passwords. We can help them, we can say whatever we want to help them feel more confident, but unless we give people the tools and the guidance, they can't practice that behavior. And it is also about the language that we use. And you will note my part of the presentation, apologies, is sponsored by Will Ferrell memes. But you know, who can resist? So soft skills, right? So-called soft skills. On the one hand, I am delighted to see that we're talking more about empathy, about communication, about psychological safety, about compassion, more than I have ever seen in my time in the industry. And I think that's great, and I think it's something we should continue to promote. However, I'm also intrigued by why are we still calling them soft skills when we all know they are anything but soft? They're really hard. And how much does this influence or undermine the perception of the value that we bring? Now, who here has been to Lake Wobegon? Right, okay, I knew a couple of people would know of the fictional town of Lake Wobegon effect, or illusory superiority. And the truth is, we've probably all been there. It's this tendency that we all have as human beings to think that we maybe are above average with certain things. So the classic example is if you survey a proportion of people and you ask them whether they have good driving skills, the majority of people will say they have above average driving skills. A majority cannot have above average skills. That's impossible. And this is a trap that I see us falling into in the security community as well, of thinking that we are immune, that overconfidence. And this applies to us, but it also applies to our more technical colleagues in security and the developers and the engineers that we're working with. So this is a really challenging perception to overcome because nobody wants to admit that they have inflated their sense of skill or importance. But it really comes down often to how we approach people and the language that we use. And as Perry said, tailoring that language for different audiences and groups. And helping people in security understand, not just in terms of illusory superiority, but also in terms of empathy and compassion, that the right fish at the wrong time can catch anyone. And I even have a sticker on my water bottle. I've got some spare if anyone wants the sticker that says the right fish at the wrong time can catch anyone. So with that, let's see what happens if I play this again. Who heard it now? Yes, majority in the room. You can now hear, once I have used that language, I've translated it for you. You can hear me saying, the right fish at the wrong time can catch anyone. What's fascinating is that my friend Tracy, my friend Perry have heard the translation. So they knew, they could hear that just like I could. And it's quite terrifying standing up here and expecting you all not to hear it. I already have the curse of knowledge. I'm already thinking, come on, surely you can hear it too. And that's a reminder for all of us that we have to keep in touch with communicating in a jargon-free way and in a way that is translated and understandable depending on our different audiences. So with that, we've got time for questions.
We do.